I'm Jack Watson. I'm a full-time UI UX designer, illustrator, animator, donut connoisseur, and I'll be your host for today's Illustrator Typography Challenge. Today is a really unique challenge. We're going to be tackling some animation, a little After Effects, but don't run away. I promise this will be so easy. Remember to go get those links in the video's description. We've got a link to download your resources to create along with us today, right below the video, and then links to our Discord communities and other challenges as well. Once in Illustrator, like I said, I've got some resources off to the side over here for you. There's this really handy link to an article on the Adobe blog about the principles of animation that if you are interested in learning about animation, I'd recommend you go check out, as well as a link to our video challenges down here, which are going to be also right after me today if you want to hang out and learn a little bit more about motion. But the link we're going to be starting with first, it's 36 Days of Type. It starts today. We're going to be working with type. We're going to be hopping over to fonts.adobe.com. So over on fonts.adobe.com, we're going to be looking for a font today that we're going to be animating with. I'm going to hop over to all fonts, take a minute to load. And you can sort by all of these different kind of filters here. We're going to be using something a bit unique today. We're going to be looking at variable fonts. So I'm going to click on variable fonts here, and it's going to pull up all the variable fonts that are in Adobe fonts. And the reason we're going to be doing this, I'm going to get into it a little bit later. It's going to be making our challenge for today a little bit easier for us once we get into After Effects. But there's also a really unique feature that is in variable type on Adobe fonts that I want to get into. You can feel free to pick any one of these that sort of strikes your fancy. I've already gone ahead and picked this JetLab variable font. You can see I've got it activated here. But if I click in here, you can see on Adobe fonts, variable fonts have this very particular interface. It's a little bit different. Normally when you view fonts, you get different styles that you can kind of get a preview of in little boxes. This gives you like this really cool interface that lets you kind of play with different controls. And you can see over here on the right side, you've got all of the different variables that you can adjust. So variable fonts, instead of just having like a bold and a regular and a light, you can actually change the properties dynamically. So there's no like one bold style. It's a range that you can kind of work through here. So you can make something heavier or thinner. You can grab here and make this sort of like taller or shorter, the midpoint of the characters. I find this to be a really nice way to kind of get inspired and look at kind of different ways you could animate the types. You can go through here and you can play with these different kind of options. You can also adjust them over here on the side if you want to. You can kind of say, do I want to animate the width? Do I want to animate the height? What about this font can I kind of use and incorporate into an animation? So like I said, I've already got this activated. You can activate the fonts with this little toggle up here. Once it's blue, you'll know that it's kind of activated and turned on. And we're going to hop back over into Illustrator. So today we're working with type. So I'm going to tell you to open up your character panel. If you don't know where that is, it's under Window in this little sub menu called Type down here. That's where you're going to find all of your different type related panels. So I've got the character one open. You can open up paragraph as well because we're going to be taking a look at that. And yeah, let's get into it. Let's start working. I've got this set up for animation. I've got it set up 1920 by 1080. If you wanted to create something for social, something that's square or something that's more of like a stories or a reels format in a vertical format, you can go over to the artboard tool here and you can just change that to be 1080 by 1080 or 1080 by 1920. However you want to set this up, you can change it with the artboard tool. I'm just going to stick with this for now. It's fine for what we're doing today. So to get started, I'm going to actually add a background to this. I'm going to make sure that I'm on in my layers. I'm going to make sure I'm on this Your Art. And I'm going to click the, select the rectangle tool from my shape tool menu here. And I've got Smart Guides on under View. Smart Guides, I've pretty much always got them on. But I can hover over the corner here where it says intersect and drag out until it kind of snaps with Smart Guides into the corner to fill my whole artboard here. I'm going to click to bring the stroke to the front. I don't need it. I'll set it to none in the swatches panel, and then I'll double click on my fill color here. I'm just going to change the color. I'm going to change it to, I've been feeling a lot of like red oranges lately. I don't know about everybody else, so it's been a burnt orange, I guess. I'm going to just change it to kind of like a burnt orange color. Alright, that looks pretty good. And now let's get into our type tool. So going over here and selecting the just basic type tool up in the toolbar, I am going to click to make some point type. Clicking to create point type will just create type that creates like a single character line. And if I drag, if I undo this, if I drag with the type tool, it's going to create paragraph type. It's not going to be what we're working with today, but if you wanted to have like a box that you could kind of change the size of this box and have it not change the, I'll zoom in, not change the size of your text. With regular, you can see if I scale this up, the text size isn't getting squished or anything. With point type, if I were to try and do that, my letters would actually scale with it. Alright, undoing that, I am going to scale this up by grabbing the corner with the selection tool and holding shift to constrain my letters so we can actually see it. And then we'll bring it onto our artboard here. In my character window, I'm just going to click into this the font name here, and I'm going to start to type out the name of the font we chose, which was that Jet Lab. I have a bunch of different styles I can choose from. The styles aren't really important because we're going to be playing with the variables, so I can just pick any one of these, drag and scale it up a little bit more. And then to change the characters, I just have some lorem ipsum by default. I'll double click to select all of my type. If you want to, you can kind of click and drag instead with the type tool. And then you're just going to type out, we're going to start with the first letter of the alphabet for 36 days of type, which is going to be an A. The other thing that I'm going to do to make our life easier is I'm going to go to paragraph and I'm going to change this to be center aligned. Or, yeah, center aligned. That's just going to help us with alignment. So scale this up even more. I really want this to be large in the space. Back in the character window, over here you see this little icon that's going to be next to the styles. You've got your name of your font, and then you've got the styles down here where you can pick different styles. If you click on this little variable font icon that shows up for variable fonts, you're going to get the same kind of menu that we had when we were looking at them on fonts.adobe.com, where we can adjust these different parameters. The thrust here is going to make our letter wider, but it's going to keep the width of the actual letter forms the same. Verticals is going to make the actual letter form wider, but it's going to keep the width, the space in between these, the same. And then we've got horizontals, which is going to change the horizontal kind of width of our letter forms. And then lift here is like an elevator. It can bring our letter kind of up or down the midpoint there. So I'm going to make two characters today for my letter A. I'm going to make a start point for my animation, and I'm going to make an end point for my animation. So I'm going to start with my starting point, and I'm going to start with something that's kind of down, sort of like ground level of the elevator. So we're going to pull the lift all the way down. And I'm going to increase the weight of this a little bit by going to that vertical and increase the vertical letter form width. You can feel free to change these however you like. I would recommend when you're doing this to pick two letter forms that have high contrast, and I'll show you what I mean. So we've got our base letter. I'm going to hit Command C to copy and Command F to make to paste in place, a copy and paste right in front of that letter. Double clicking into this, I can change my letter to be white, and so we can actually see what happens when we change it. So we made our initial state, we're going to make our end state now. So I'm going to go back over here into my variable type, and I'm going to reverse course. I'm actually going to bring the lift all the way up, so our end state is going to have the elevator at the top. And then I'm actually going to also bring my weight down. So I'm going to bring this back down to where it's a thin letter, right? So now you can see there's a lot of contrast, visual contrast between my letters. I'll also think, this is just personal preference, I'm going to bring the thrust up a little bit, so it's going to be a little bit wider without being wider in terms of the actual weight. And you can see, since I've got these kind of different white and black, you can see the difference between them, but if I move them side by side, these two letters look very different. Even if you're going to be just exploring the lift, make sure that you have some difference between your start and your end state, otherwise not much is going to be happening in your animation. Alright, so now we've got our letter forms, our start and our end state. We need to set up our file a little bit so that we're ready for animating. If we, we're going to do a little bit of naming your layers, a little cleanup. So over here in my layers panel, if I just kind of pull this out to make it easier for you to see, we're going to go down and we're going to add a new layer right down here. And we're going to double click on layer 3 and we're going to call this one start. I'm going to hit enter to save that name, make a new layer. We're going to name this one end. enter. I'm going to put my end state on my end layer, just clicking and dragging the actual layer. You can see it's highlighted. I've got it selected. I'm just going to drag it right on there. So now if I open up my layers, start and end, I've got the letter forms on there. If you want, you can also name this background, double-clicking your art and name this one background. And to make this just really easy for ourselves, I'm actually going to hit the trash can and delete our notes. We don't need it anymore. It's just kind of for our reference, and it's going to make it easier once we get into After Effects if we've only got the layers that we actually need to work with. Okay, so now I'm going to actually select my letters. I'm going to drag to select the selection tool. Now hold down Shift and click to deselect the background. So I've only got my letters selected now. And for After Effects, we need to turn our letters from editable text into shapes. So under the Type menu here, I can go down to Create Outlines, and that will take my letters. I'm going to hit Create Outlines. And now I've got actual points. You can see shapes with points. And I'm going to go, and since we're almost ready to animate, I'm going to make these the same color because we want our start and end points to be the same color. So I'm going to double click on my fill. We'll just drag this up and make maybe like a light peachy color, something like that. That looks pretty good to me. Now there's one thing I want to mention before we get over to After Effects. If you are not using a variable font, I really want to make sure that I make this clear, and this is why we used variable fonts for this. If I drag this off, so now we've got our two start and end side by side, and I'm just going to, with the direct selection tool, hold down Shift to select both of these letters, and I've got the direct selection tool so I can point something out to you. If we kind of zoom in and look at these, if I count along the edge, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I want to make sure that if I'm using two different letters, I'm making the letters myself, or I'm modifying them myself, I want to have the same number of points in the same approximate location. The points need to kind of be the same. Otherwise, After Effects is going to have a harder time kind of animating between the two states. And so we've got our start state, we've got our end state. We want them to be close in terms of the number of points. And because we used a variable font, it kind of handled all of that for us. But that being said, I also want to make sure that for the sake of animation, these two letters are in the same position, our start and our end state. So similar to how I had them before, overlapping each other on the artboard, I'll just drag to select everything. Going up in the control bar, I can actually hit Align to Artboard, and then I'll just use Horizontal Align Center. For this case, for today, I want them actually overlapping. Let's do a quick file and save as. I'm going to save this on my computer so we can get into After Effects. I'm just going to save it right to the desktop so I can find it. How's everybody doing in the live chat? Can't forget to say hi to everybody. Let me know if you have any questions. If you're going to be working on this for 36 days of type, you can chat with us live every day at 9:30 a.m. Pacific here on Behance or the Adobe Live YouTube channel. Steve says we could also do fun things in any type using the Touch Type tool. Yes, you could use the Touch Type tool if you wanted to add a little character, a little rotation to your letters. Alright, now we've in After Effects. The first thing we're going to do when you open this up is you're going to hit the blue New Project button. It's going to open up a new project for you that's blank, it's got nothing in it, and then we need to add our Illustrator file to it. So over here in New Composition from Footage, I'm going to click on this, and then I'm going to navigate to my Illustrator file. So I'm going to import this. We're not going to go over the details today, but under Import As, I'm going to tell After Effects I want to import this as a composition and retain layer sizes under this dropdown. That means that my Illustrator file will come in as a composition with all of my layers in it, so I don't have to like go through and set anything up. It's just going to bring it all in with my layers named the same way that they were in Illustrator, and they're going to be in the same positions and everything, and I'm just going to hit OK, and I'll show you what that looks like. So over along the side here, you can see I've got this project that's got all of the contents of my project in here. This little icon here next to Challenge 5 is the composition that After Effects made for me. So if I look at this little you can think of a composition After Effects as kind of like being an artboard, but it's also like its own little project, its own little animation. So you can have multiple compositions. This is just kind of like a single animation in a single artboard with all of the layers that make up that kind of animation. So I'm going to double click on it to open it. When I do that, you're going to see our composition is actually going to show up here just like it would like an artboard, right? And then down here we've got our timeline. This is where you're actually going to be editing your motion. This is where everything kind of happens. Down below that shows our layers listed just like we named them, right? We can also edit our properties for our our timeline in our composition up here. So if I right click, I can select composition settings, and in here I can change the duration. I think normally it's set to something like 30 seconds or whatever. We don't actually need that much time. So if we go in here, we're going to shorten it to like 3 seconds. So, you know, I've got like hours, minutes. This second one to the end is going to be seconds, so I'm going to type in 0, 3, and then 0, 0. So this is going to be 3 seconds for our duration, and I'm going to hit OK. All right, so like I said, it set it all up to be, people in our live chat are saying the negative space is made a J. That wasn't intentional, but yeah, I see that now. All right, it brought in our layers, but these, we can't actually edit them in After Effects. Much like in Illustrator when you've got live type and you can't actually modify those letters, we can't actually modify these layers as they are. So in order to make them things that we can edit in After Effects, I'm going to go up to Layer. I'm going to go all the way down to Create, and I'm going to tell After Effects to create shapes from this vector layer. So I selected these both by clicking on the first one, holding down Shift to select End and Start, our 2 letters, Layer, Create shapes from vector layer. And you're going to get these 2 kind of like blue new layers that say End Outlines and Start Outlines with a little star icon. That's what we want to keep. We're going to select End, we can just delete that, and we're going to select Start, and we're going to delete that. We don't actually need those layers anymore. We're just going to be working with our shape layers from now on. So those were just kind of like there for a reference for us to make our shape layers. All right, now I'm gonna need you to stay with me on this next part because it's gonna get a little bit more complex. We're gonna go in here and we can actually open our shape layers up, and inside of these shape layers you're gonna find the actual contents. You're gonna find the actual paths, just like we have vector paths in Illustrator. We have vector paths in After Effects that we can manipulate. So I'm opening them up just like I would in Illustrator with these little arrows, and I'm going to open them all the way up until I get down to the paths. So opening up the contents here, dropping everything down, you can see I'm keeping them the same. So if I open up the contents on End Outlines, I'm opening them up on Start Outlines. So I'm going to go Contents, open up Group 1, you're going to see I've got Path 1, and I've got Path 2. And you'll know you've kind of hit the end once you see a little stopwatch that lets you put a keyframe next to each of these. So I'm going to do the same thing with Start, opening each of these up until I get down to where I can make keyframes. So once I get there, I'm actually going to be creating this whole animation on Start. So I'm only going to be using the paths from End, and I'm going to be copying them into my Start state here. So on Start, at 0 seconds in the timeline, you can see I've dragged all the way to where it says 00F. I'm going to click on that stopwatch for Path 1 and Path 2. If I drag off, you can see Illustrator, After Effects made these little keyframes. Keyframes kind of hold the position you can think of. It says like, I want to keep this state of my animation. So you can create these little points that say like, this is a important point, or an important set of paths that I want to like hold or I want to animate between, right? So starting here, I've made my little keyframes. I'm now going to slide this little time indicator down until I get to 1 second. It's going to say 1F here. So once it says, or 100F. Also, I'm going to slide this time navigator so we can get a little bit more. This can happen sometimes if your animation was shorter, your composition was shorter. So I'm just going to click on my first one, holding down Shift all the way to the bottom, and then I'll just drag these blue lines till they reach the end. That way I make sure that my composition lasts to the end. Back into my Start. Like I said, I'm dragging this down to 1 second. I'm now going to go up and I'm going to copy my paths from my end state onto my Start state as keyframes. So if I look, I want to go, okay, I'm going to take Path 1, I'm going to go up to Path 1 in my end state, and hit Command C. So I'm just going to copy those paths. When I go back down and I select path 1 in my start state and I hit Command V, it's actually going to copy those paths as a new keyframe right in path 1. And this is why it's important to have that start and end state be the same. That way that transition is going to happen between those paths. I'll do the same thing with path 2, copying it using Command C, selecting it, and Command V to paste it. So now you can see that I've got a keyframe that goes from 1 to 1 and from 2 to 2. And now I don't need my end frames anymore. So I'm just going to hide this just like you would in Illustrator by poking the little eye out to make sure it's no longer visible. And if I go back to the beginning, scrubbing kind of with this time indicator, you can see that I now have a little bit of animation going. If you want to preview what that looks like, you're just going to hit the space bar and it will play through as many keyframes as you kind of have, looping when it reaches the end. If you want to stop, you're going to hit space bar again. If we want to keep going, we can do one more thing here to make sure that our animation loops once we get to the end. I'm going to drag from this 1 second down to 2 seconds now. And you can actually also copy the same way that we did with our end state. We can actually copy states from within our layer as well, in our shape layer. So I'm going to go back to the very initial state here of our shapes. We're going to go to path 1, that initial state, and I'm going to click on it to highlight that keyframe. I'm going to hit Command C to copy that highlighted keyframe, the very first state, and then at 2 seconds, making sure my time indicator is on 2 seconds, I'm going to hit Command V, and that will paste my first path into that same path at the end. If everybody's keeping up with me, let me know if you're having trouble in the chat. You can go back and watch the replay if you need to. Going back to path 2, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to select the initial state for path 2, Command C, all the way down onto 2 seconds here. For the initial state, I'm going to hit Command V to paste that. So now, if we hit spacebar, our animation goes all the way through to the second state and then all the way back down to the beginning state. So now we've got a looping kind of animation. It actually ends up being shorter than our initial kind of timeline that we set up. So if you want to adjust your composition length, the duration, just go back up here to challenge 5, right click, composition settings, and we're going to drop that down to 3 because our end state ended up, our last keyframes ended up being on 2 seconds instead. I'll select 3 and type in 2. And then we'll hit play. Now I'll just keep looping forever and ever and ever. There's one more thing I want to show you while we're here, if you stayed with me. And that is going to be, I'm actually going to select path 1 and path 2, holding down shift to select all of my keyframes. There's one little trick we can still do here. We can go to animation, keyframe assistant, easy ease. I'm not going to go into what easing does today. You can watch the video challenges after me to learn more. But you can see now, instead of being linear and just kind of like a little bit boring, it adds a little bit of slowness, slow and speed up, changes the speed at which my keyframes are transitioning. So there you go. Once you're ready to save this out and share this with everybody, you're going to go up to composition and you're going to say add to render queue. It's going to take you immediately over to the render queue. We're not going to get into the details on how all of this works, but we're going to go to this output here, output 2. We need to specify where it saves to. So I'm just going to save it to my desktop, and MP4 is fine for uploading to Discord. H.264 is fine for today. And then I'm going to hit the big render button. It's going to save it on out, and you can hop over to Discord. This is where everybody's been sharing their work. You can check in the video below me to find a link to Discord. Navigate to Daily Creative Challenge, DCC feedback. You can drag your file right into Discord and say, check out my letter A animation. Hit enter and it's going to upload it, and you can see our video previews right in Discord. The MP4 format saves there. Check out what everybody's doing. Allison did this really cool endangered species cheetah stamp. Satlin's working on some little jellyfish. Everybody's been doing such cool stuff. I really love seeing it in the Discord. But that's going to be it for me for today. I hope you enjoyed this Illustrator typography challenge. A little bit different. We went over variable type in Illustrator and then animated in After Effects. We're live every day at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time here on Behance and on the Adobe Live YouTube. We've got more live content all day long, so stay here to catch the next live stream. I think the video, like I said, video challenge up next if you want to get more motion. But I will see you all next time. Bye, everyone.